everybody. Hello, parents, everybody who is watching either this evening or who will be watching later. I want to warmly welcome you to our April parent learning session for the Bryt Network. So, Bryt is our national network that works together with schools and communities to support schools doing schools differently, to support kids who have had an extended absence from school. And we are the family engagement team who you're going to meet in a second. And we are here every month, every week. And the first Tuesday of the month, we kick off each month with a learning session, which is what tonight is. Every single month is themed of topics that parents have identified as being topics of interest that parents would either like to learn more about or just talk more about with other parents. And so we will be talking about the theme of the month tonight, which is parenting my sweet friendless child. So this topic is for anyone who has a child or a younger person who is currently or who has struggled with making friends. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. So the month kicks off with the learning session, which is tonight. And then each week, we have just a really informal parent conversation about that topic. And you'll hear more about the dates and how to connect with those at the end of the session. My name is Megan, and I am so lucky to be on the family engagement team with my fabulous colleagues here. And I have my kid is actually 21 now, my daughter, and I've had a journey of lots of different experiences with parenting her and lots of my experiences have mapped on really nicely to some of the topics we've talked about over each of these months. I live in Western Massachusetts, and I will be facilitating most of this tonight. But before I do that, I want to pass over and introduce the other folks of the family engagement team who you will meet each week on these parent conversations. So I'll pass it to Lakeisha.
Hello, good night, everybody. I'm Lakeisha, and as Megan stated, I'm one of the Bryt coordinators here tonight. I'm actually residing in Atlanta, Georgia. I have an 8-year-old son, who is going to be 8 years old actually next month. Um, and he is not only with the parenting, struggles that I have with him, he also is on the autism spectrum, and he also has ADHD. So there's two things that it's challenging, but it's interesting to find out different ways to deal with him. Um, and just like you folks out there, parenting is not easy, but as long as we have a safe space for support, asking questions, because you're not alone. Everyone thinks that they're by themselves during this time when they're parenting, but we're here for you. So welcome. And I'm going to pass it on to my counterpart, Julie.
Hello, everyone. As Lakeisha said, I'm Julie, and I am living on the West Coast. I live in Oregon, and I'm the mom of 4 adult children, one of which found out just recently at age 27, he has autism. 3 of my kids have ADHD, and I've been through the ups and downs of parenting as well. In fact, I learn often quite a bit through these parent learning events, and kind of wish I would have been watching them all along when I was in the throes of parenting. So I see myself through the lens of parents that are struggling through the parenting gig. I'm really excited to learn more tonight about parenting, someone who is having a hard time having friends, and I guess I will pass it on to Victor.
Thanks, Julie. My name is Victor. I hail from Boston, Massachusetts, and I have a child who's 14. She comes from a history or a legacy of only children. So my mother was an only child. My partner, Sabina, who I'm married to, is an only child. and I'm an only child. So
Wow.
making friendships is interesting for us because we have no model. We have no older sibling to model that for us. So we are out in the world trying to figure this out. And it's always been a challenge sometimes because people have siblings, people have brothers and sisters, and to look after or to be with when they go home and when they go out in the world, particularly when they go to school. So it's sort of like you're on your own all the time, seeking new territory out in the world. And when I also did early childhood for 30 years and really helped children figure out friendships and really watched children play for many, many years and sort of made those connections on why certain kids connect and certain kids don't, and why kids exclude other kids. So I was really in the front lines of this for many, many years. So I'm very excited to hear what Megan has figured out and what she's researched, and I will be adding to the conversation as well.
Nice. Thank you so much, Victor, Julie, and Lakeisha. So again, this is your family engagement team. So these are the folks that are holding space each week to have just informal conversations and connections about these topics, which we'll be having tonight. So again, the topic tonight is parenting my friendless child. And so what we're going to be talking about, and I really, I always love hearing introductions of my teammates because I learn more and more all the time. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that can make, making friends a little bit harder. And so some of my teammates kind of tapped into some of those reasons that, or some of those contexts where we see that. Um, so that's what tonight is. And so what we're going to talk about a little bit is why friendships matter. Why are they important for kids? Our role as parents, and what we can do to support friendships and support our kids, learning how to build that muscle a little bit more, whether they're younger, middle school, high school, to build that muscle around making meaningful connections. And then why some kids can struggle with it. And there's different reasons, right? So what are the different categories of reasons why our kids might struggle with it? How kids, and together with parents, we can support kids in practicing some of the skills that can really help in building friendships, supporting those really painful parts around like rejection or exclusion, or when our kids aren't chosen or aren't invited or aren't, how to navigate that stuff. And then when it might be time, as much as we can do as parents, when it might be time to get extra help for our kids around some of this stuff. So that's what we'll talk about. I'll go through some of this stuff. I might pause and ask my teammates here what they think about it, or, if they have some examples. But I'm going to start about, talking about why they matter. So I think that we can all probably have answers to this, and you who are listening, like, why is it important to have friends? We probably all have things that come to mind. But for kids who are developing and young people who are developing, it really does. It really is critical for a child's emotional and psychological development. So when we think about it, it almost reminds me of, I used to work in schools around social emotional learning, and folks in social emotional learning would always talk about after high school, after school time, those are the skills that would be most important in getting a job, or in, it's those kinds of communication skills, or the kind of rapport building skills that we learn largely through friendships. So not only are they building those kinds of skills, that skill building can help our kids have the kind of social connections that both support emotional well-being. It's a place where kids can see themselves, see each other as they're developing, growing up, kind of making sense of the world, meaning making together. A place they can go to when they're having a hard time, maybe in their family or in school, a place to really support emotional well-being in that way. And then kind of support resilience and confidence, as they grow up. And then, as I mentioned, having the continuing to strengthen those muscles around friendship making and the ability to make friends and keep friends and nurture friendships are the same skills that can really contribute to just broader life success, right? In how we navigate life. So, I wonder for my teammates, is there anything else that you can think of that that you would describe, or it could be something that was already mentioned that you feel is a most important reason why friendship matters to our kids, for our kids?
I know having a deep connection, at least for my child, with just somebody in the classroom. Sometimes it was the teacher at first would help her get to school. And if she didn't have that, then I noticed she didn't want to go to school as much. She wasn't excited to go.
Yeah.
But if she landed with one person in that classroom when she was young, I think that's still the case now, but I really noticed it when she was young. Then she would be really excited to go and either show what she was wearing or what she had for
Yes.
lunch. That connection was so deep.
Yes. I love that because that's also a great example of the mirror too, to like, show what I'm wearing or show what I have or bringing in this new thing to show. It's sort of like a witness to one's life, right? So all of these things, that's great. And when we talk about, this series is about parenting, right? And like the parenting role. So I just want to name, and I don't know how many watching have been through this, but it can be very, very deeply painful. And I know this when we have a child who might struggle with this, might either want more friends and not have them, or if um, the exclusion, you can see the exclusion sometimes, like not being invited or not being chosen or being the last to be chosen. And I don't know if kids still do that at recess, but like choosing teams, like that was like when I grew up, right? Like that's how we did it. I don't know if they still do that, but that's so painful to be the last and like, okay, we'll take so and so. So, so this can be for kids who struggle with making friends. I just want to acknowledge and validate how painful that is for us, right? For parents. And that's why you'll hear more about it at the end. But what I encourage you, if you're watching this, to hop on to one of those informal parent conversations about this, because I bet a lot of us have had some shared experiences. If you want to talk about it, get more support. But the good news is, as parents, there are things that we can do to support this, and to support our kids' journey. So we're going to talk about some of what those are here. So these are just a few categories of some of the reasons why it can be hard for some kids. Now, I'm sure we all know kids, whether they're our own kids, maybe nieces, nephews, maybe kids we work with, that are like social butterflies that seem so easy. They just go to a playground and have like 10 kids playing with them all at once. So, there are lots of kids that don't, this isn't even an issue because they just sort of naturally have some of these skills. But these are just 5 different categories. And I wonder if you're watching this and if you have a child who you think can struggle sometimes with making a friend, I wonder if you can maybe locate, one or more of these reasons that may line up for your child. So for some kids, they're just, personality differences, right? Like sometimes kids who are shyer, they're more shy, may have a harder time just even, you think about, let's think about a teenager, right? Who maybe is like going to in the lunch in like the cafeteria or going somewhere, and like that whole thing about like going up to sit at a table where there's an empty chair and introducing yourself, like, right, for some kids that's no problem. For a lot of kids that's torture and just can't happen and they'd rather leave the room, right? And sometimes that's shyness and sometimes it's some of these other things, but shyness, which is just nothing wrong with that. That's just a natural personality trait, right? But for kids who are a little more shy, that not always can make it a little harder to make friends. And then, as well, kids that are more introverted, like the kids who are more maybe gregarious and outgoing and extroverted, the ones that either go to the playground or go to the party maybe in high school and can talk to anyone, go up to anybody, like really kind of enjoys that or loves that. It's harder for the kids who maybe their preference is to be kind of alone at home with a book, but that doesn't mean they don't want friends, right? Like if you have a kid who loves like just being cozy at home with a book or a movie, that doesn't mean that they're immune to loneliness, right? So personality. And then just, yeah, social skill challenges. So which some of these map onto each other, but some, you could have a kid that doesn't struggle with shyness, but has difficulty with conversation, either initiating conversation with other kids or just continuing for different reasons. Reading social cues, right? These are some things that maybe you have a kid who, you know, that you have an opportunity to build more muscle with them around the social skill stuff, that could lead to them being able to, have an easier time making friends. And then past negative experiences, right? And we know this is very human. This is very human, right? For adults or kids, right? So if you have a kid who maybe you lived somewhere in some town and your kid had a really rough experience, let's say with bullying, and that's a serious example, or just kind of social exclusion or just rejection. And then your kid sort of got used to that or internalized that, maybe made some meaning of why, or had a story they were telling themselves about why. And then maybe you move to a new town, fresh slate, starting a whole new neighborhood, new school, but your kid is bringing those former experiences with them. And that might, they might have then that voice inside them that tells them not to go kind of introduce themselves, or that it's safer to stay a little separated, right? So these past negative experiences can also impact. And then it could be if you're a category of more of like if your child suffers with social anxiety as a health issue, that can be a significant barrier, right? To and there's lots to do, lots of social skills groups. There's lots of work that can be done to support someone living with social anxiety, to build friendships, but that could make it, someone living with social anxiety, a little bit harder to go. Again, the things that for some kids or young people might seem not only easy, but something they want to do, like again, at a party, going up to different kids, or or at a pickup basketball game, just jumping in there and doing, for some kids, for kids with social anxiety, if right? If you have a child, then those things are not as accessible. And then same ADHD, autism. And when I go through these, then I wonder if like I'll pause and see with my teammates like thoughts about these or anything that pops to mind when they think about these. But yeah, ADHD and autism, again, that does not mean that kids living with and navigating ADHD or autism can't make friends. Not what it means, but it can make it a little bit harder. And we can talk about that in a sec. And then the environmental factors, right? So another category can be if you happen to have moved, your kid's 15 and you've moved like 4 or 5 different schools for that kid, maybe never having that opportunity to really take the time it takes sometimes to build friendships. And so that can be something external that impacts the ability. And then just limited peer interaction, like maybe you live on a street that has no kids or teenagers or something, or there's something that is set up in a way where there's just the access isn't there. So you can see these are all different reasons, and they range from sort of like internal to external, or past experiences, but different reasons. And I wonder, for my teammates, does anything come to mind when you see these categories, or anything that you've got on your mind about this?
I do, especially when it comes to, and it's a combination of stuff because my child has now ADHD and autism. When he was diagnosed with it earlier, I was worried about him not being able or won't be able to meet friends or have difficulties around that. Now he's doing well with that. And I think what the issue is now on the backside of stuff is the fact that now that he makes friends, the boundaries are a little blurred because, although he wants to make friends, he doesn't understand. You can't be in somebody's face all the time, type of thing. So it's like the personal space is one thing that I have to continuously tell him, that you can play with that person, but you can't be in their face like that. You have to give them, some
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
And then it goes back to, with this diagnosis, I guess just being a mama bear also, it goes back to, is my kid going to be safe at school? Is it going to be bullied, type of stuff, later on in life? And I'm hoping that's not the case. I want my kid to be as safe as possible. And hopefully when he's older and he makes friends, like I hope these friends aren't going to take him or take advantage of him. So that's another, and I think this is a mama thing, or I always think about, the future about stuff like that. So as it stands now, he's in a well-protected class. They protect him, so, and he's able to make friends and stuff like that appropriately. So, but the other things will creep in a little bit, and it makes me a little bit anxious.
Yeah,
He's only 8.
yeah, and that's such a great example that Lakeisha shared, right? About some of these things that overlap, right? So, how amazing, right? That Lakeisha's son has learned and developed making friends, navigating autism, and now like the social cues or some of the other things that are like the skill building, while making the friends. So that's such a good example.
And I just wanted to add, Lakeisha, I hear what you're saying. Like I currently work as a special ed teacher, and one of the things I'm seeing in schools a lot is that educators are being tasked with teaching social emotional learning skills. And I don't know that, to be honest with you, we see a lot of kids coming in that really need help navigating, the social structures and connecting with other kids, just in the world we're in now. And I agree with the fact that you're saying there's a lot of overlap here. The ADHD overlapped with the autism. And you go into any school and you see kids that are in different pockets. There's isolated kids. And, it is something that we as educators are going to also have to address alongside parents.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's, just thinking kind of empathically about this overlap, and then we can kind of move to the next topic. But gosh, you can imagine when you look at all these categories, you could imagine a kid who actually fits every single one, right? So I think what's important about that is, as parents, the empathy for that, and then the understanding there's reasons, like all these things when we, as parents, right, we sometimes are like, gosh, why isn't our kid doing this or not doing this, right? And then to pull back and realize what's underneath some of the things. Like I just remember when I was a kid too, I wouldn't say I was all the way, I wouldn't use the word shy all the way, but I leaned that way. I leaned more that way. Um, and my mom is the complete opposite. And so my mom would always really want me to, like, even when I was a teenager, we'd visit my grandmother, and she would just be like, go out with the teenagers. And I just wanted to like kind of be in and play Scrabble with my grandmother. But and my mom didn't understand, like, why wasn't I? Well, maybe some of the things on this list, like some of the reasons. So I think it helps us be curious, empathic, when we can think about there's reasons behind what our kids might be going through around this stuff. So talking about the emotional impact for our kids of loneliness and kind of recognizing the signs for this, and just a note on that. Everybody's different, right? All of our kids are different. We're all unique as parents, as kids, everyone's unique. So, someone could have 5 or 6 good friends and still really struggle with loneliness. And someone could have that one good friend, like Victor, you're talking about that one good friend, and not feel lonely at all. Like they might only have one friend, but they feel good. They feel socially connected. So it doesn't always line up with the number of friends your child may or may not have. So loneliness can be tricky to you know determine whether, and asking is great with kids, and having those kinds of conversations to ask and look into it. But I think as this can apply to both younger and older kids. On the younger side, frequent solo play. Like I used to live, actually a few different times. I've lived near schools and school playgrounds during recess. Like you can see, right? If recess is outside and it's like say an elementary school, you can kind of see, right? If there's one kid who tends to just play alone, and maybe that kid isn't invited in, and then you might see sort of day after day, it's sort of always that way. So hopefully schools and like recess monitors hopefully are noticing and trying to, check in. But it's a good thing if you're not driving by schools all the time. Maybe you're in your neighborhood or you're looking and you can tell that that there's, maybe your child tends to just play alone. And again, it's figuring out, is that preference or is that loneliness or, lack of opportunity? And then for older kids, yeah, that exclusion from group activities. And like, I think one of the most common ones for older kids is parties, right? If like practically everyone in the grade is going to one party and your kid didn't even know about it or wasn't invited. We had, all of you that are watching this, our learning sessions from the past like few years are all accessible online, and you'll hear more about that at the end of this as well too. But there is one a while back on parenting in the technological age or something like that, like parenting in tech. And I just remember that guest who joined us to do that learning session. I remember she made a comment, I think it was her, that with so many kids who have phones, teenagers who have phones, and sometimes have like the Find My Friends app on there and could maybe see, maybe it's your friend has a lot of friends, your child has a lot of friends, maybe there's like 15 friends on there and like 14 of them are all at someone's house and your child isn't, and they can see it on the phone, right? So exclusion, for older kids, younger kids, that kind of thing. And then your kid might talk about it. Kid might cry about it. Your kid might, talk about not having friends, wanting friends and not having friends. And again, back to that part around how hard this is for us, for parents. That's so hard, right? To have your child so sad and lonely and coming to you about it. That's, and I think as parents, we'll talk about this in a little bit, like we want to just fix that and, just have that, okay, I'll be your, your friend. We want to like take it over, right? But like how to support your child in building the skills to make their own friends. Even though we kind of, with these sort of situations might feel the need to come in and just, okay, you can hang out with me every single day, kind of trying to dive in that way. You might see this if you're noticing that your child is avoiding social situations or feeling anxious about them. And again, if your child is starting to feel increasingly anxious about going to group things or social situations, we'll talk about this in the end too, but that could be one of those signs where it might be time to get extra help or to check in, with a therapist, or extra help around if that anxiety with social situations seems to be getting bigger and bigger. But that, you can imagine your child avoiding, maybe there's some like optional event at school, like spring fair at school or something like that, and it sounds fun and like everyone's going to be there and your child doesn't want to go. And getting curious about that, like what might that be? That could be a million reasons, but might it be right that they don't have any social connections there, and so everyone else is going to be like buddied up and having fun, and your child might not. And then the difficulty understanding social norms, we've talked about that too, but that can be for some kids just a struggle, like a desire, again, a deep desire to make friends and have friends, and continuously trying to work hard on doing that, but it not always working out for your kids sometimes because of these social norms. So unless anyone has another comment about that, I can move to the next.
I
Anyone?
do, Megan,
Yeah.
actually. So I had two children. They were in different years, and when I was teaching, and they were selected mutes, they were called, and they chose not to speak at school. They would speak at home. They would speak with their siblings. If I saw them out in the street, they would be talking to their family and to other friends,
Wow.
but they chose not to speak in the classroom. And
Wow.
I took this personally. I was like, what am I doing wrong? Am I not making this place safe for them? And it found out that they just needed more social pragmatics in settings where they felt uncomfortable, places that were new. And what I heard from the speech therapist is that most of them start out just being shy and not wanting to talk, but then they get a situation where they feel comfortable, but then they're so scared to make that leap
Yeah.
that they need to
Yeah.
almost change environments to talk. So
Wow.
for
That's
this one
interesting.
child, she didn't talk the entire year at school. And I told her mother, probably when she goes to her new school, she's probably going to talk the first day. But now she
Yeah.
feels like she can't because it's too much pressure because everyone's waiting to hear her voice, right? And she
Wow.
doesn't want to put herself out there like that. And sure enough,
Yeah.
her mom emailed me and said, "Yep, she's talking with Storm at her new
Wow.
school."
So she was. Wow. In the new environment. Yeah. That's so fascinating. I think that's such a good example too of how some of these things can build, right? So, that just being a little shy at first or a little nervous, like built into like a selective mutism, right? Or, thinking about some kids that if, the social anxiety builds and builds can almost, for some folks lead to like a agoraphobia, right? So it's like, how do
Yeah.
we, think of these, yeah, that's great.
And
So,
I have another example to this other child. That was one of them. The other one, she actually did social play and started talking in the room within
wow.
months. And that really was, everyone was like really excited because she started to talk, but it was interesting to see two children had different approaches on how
Yeah, totally different.
in that. So
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That is, and I think that's such a great segue into this idea that, adults, and in particular for tonight, we're talking about parents, right? How impactful and we can be. So this isn't, this might be heartbreaking to see our child who struggles, such a sweet kid, a good kid, struggles and wants a friend and can't, isn't successful making a meaningful social connection, and how sometimes it would be natural for us to feel kind of hopeless or helpless around that as parents because we want to help so badly. But as Victor just described, things that could happen for teachers and educators in the classroom, there are things we can do as parents that are really, really important as parents. So there's going to be a few different ideas on these slides around that, but validating is a really huge key for anything, whether it's supporting your child making friends or other kind of difficult experience your child is having. So just the presence of being able to be that container for your kid, who's sharing their experiences, either their sadness, their loneliness, maybe they're embarrassed about not having whatever it is. So, being able to hold it, hear it, and like that sounds really hard. That sounds so painful. That sounds hard. How do we validate their feelings without telling them they should be feeling something different, right? So it's not like accidentally conveying, no, no, no. And it's also, I think what's important is we may wish that it was different for our kid. We may wish that so much. So we might be like, no, all the kids in your class love you. All the kids in your class want to hang out with you. And if that's not your child's experience, if they know that's not true, that's not their experience, then that as protective of a place you might be coming from, that's kind of like gaslighting and kind of really invalidating, right? The reality. So just being able to contain and being able to hold the reality of that truth. Like, yeah, you really wish you had a good friend right now. Like that must be so hard. You really want a good friend. Like being able to acknowledge it without saying, oh, you shouldn't care about that stuff, or, whatever it is, without dismissing their emotions. Practicing social skills. Now, maybe your younger kids might be more game for something like this than your teenagers, but maybe not. Maybe your teenagers would be up for doing this. But kind of even thinking about a teenager going to, or a high schooler going to a party, and if your teenager's up for it, like, okay, there might be kids there that you don't know. There might be kids from the other school there. How are you gonna say there's someone you walk in, there's someone you don't know? Let's practice. Let's practice. All right, I'm that kid. You're coming in. What should we do? Just kind of making it fun, but a way to just role play just simple conversations, introductions, how you might enter a space. Maybe it's your younger kid who has never really been able to, if they see a group of kids playing on the playground, hasn't ever felt able to enter that group and join. So kind of role playing that, how to practice, you know, joining and asking to play. And then, the creating opportunities. So there's this balance, this line, right, about not taking over because we want to be able to support our kids in building the muscles to do these things themselves, right? We really want to support that development. But some ways we can be helpful while we're supporting their muscle building and skill building is, can we be helpful in creating opportunities or finding opportunities? So again, for a younger kid, it could be helping, arrange play dates or kind of hangouts. For middle school, maybe you find a little like theater camp or a free activity at the library that sounds like right in line with something they're interested in. And, depending on how, if your kid is shy or has social anxiety, thinking in advance, ooh, how do I bridge that? How do I get them? So I know they would like that. I know they would have fun going to that Magic the Gathering group, right? But like, how do I get them there? So maybe if you have this kind of relationship with your child, maybe you go to the first one and then you kind of pull back, or maybe you just drive by before you go. Maybe the group's on a Monday and on Sunday you drive by and point out the door. That's where you go in, and figuring out how to make those opportunities accessible. And that kind of relates to this encouraging the interests, because um, it can feel for some shy kids or kids who struggle with social anxiety really intense or overwhelming to just like conversation with another young person could be really like overwhelming. So, but if they're doing something, and this is coming up later too, but if they're doing something, they're not looking at each other, maybe it's an art class or something, like they're not looking at each other, but there's other kids their age who also love that thing, that you don't have to look at each other, you're doing the thing. So figuring out how to, the first step in this is figuring out, cultivating, what are they interested in? What brings them joy? What do they love to do? And then that can be, then you've got a little like social capital. If you do end up going to one of those groups in the library or something like that, they can contribute. They have something to talk about because they have a shared passion. And then the last idea here is bringing them around your friends, right? If you have a good friend, a kind friend, like a friend that's thoughtful, and just having them see you in those, having healthy friendships, but also maybe even doing a little think aloud, or narrating it like, wow, um Kara is so kind. I was sick the other day, and did you notice she brought soup? She's such a good friend. Like, or whatever the thing is. Or wow, I had a really bad day yesterday, and when I have a bad day, I love talking to Denise. So like that kind of, just making it explicit. But I'm wondering, with any of you all here, have you felt like in your own parenting journeys at different times, either a long time ago, are any of these things that have stood out for any of you in particular?
I know for me, they have. I was just thinking of one of my kids who's really into strategy board games and has really found a community through that. And just being willing, like you said, to go with them to go do something in the community, or inviting, other people to go do it with us. I think it's really important to just encourage that in your kids. And while it may not be, and we of course made the mistake of, we're both, my husband and I were college athletes, so our kids had to all be in sports, and we had to learn the hard way that that wasn't for all of our kids. And so it's really easy as a parent sometimes to think about what works for us and how we think it might look to have good friends, to be accepted in a group. And it may look different for our child. And so kind of, goes back to that validating empathy, but also like really observing your kid and seeing what they like, and then cultivating that.
I love that. Such a good point, Julie, that we can't, it's, yeah, they're not our, like we can't just assume we love this, so they're going to love it too. And if they haven't realized they love it yet, they haven't been exposed enough, or, we really have to create that space. That's a really good point. That's great. Okay. So, again, this idea of practice making friends. So like all things, right? The more we do it, with support, right? The more, comfortable, or the pathway can be more accessible. So, if we're trying to think intentionally about practice for our kids, whether they're younger or older, and how do we create opportunities for them to practice, familiar settings can be less scary than, again, that high school party or that new school, or walking into the giant cafeteria at school, or the recess, playground. What's familiar? Where, a family gathering, a larger family gathering, or neighbors that they may see all the time. How can you have some of those skills, like the practice of the skills in a familiar setting? So the skills might be new, they're practicing, but the setting and the people are familiar. So to Julie's point, you want to be able to match with the activity and the thing that your kid likes to do. So it may not be a sport, but if it is a sport or a different kind of club, those activities really are there for that reason. So, sports, the whole teamwork thing, everybody has a role or a job. If your child likes sports, that's a great way, right? Because they're there as a team member and they have a contribution there as a team member or as a club, right? The club, if you go or a class, anything like that, where um, your child showing up is part of the whole. So when your child's not there, they're missed because they're missing. So that's that sort of thing. Again, the role playing social scenarios. And then, encourage starting with one, which relates to something Victor said a little while back, right? So you might have a kid who really just desires a group of friends. I want like a big group of friends. Like that may be their desire, but how do you support? Let's just start with one. Like how do we build um one good friend? Like let's practice on that and then kind of go from there. And in many ways that can be a more potentially sustainable too, right? To be investing in the skills to build one friend instead of a full group. And then again, thinking about those 5 categories again in the beginning of the things that can be barriers for some kids or can make it harder for some kids. Some of the things in those categories, reaching out, being vulnerable to introduce yourself to a new person, or like asking a friend to like hang out, that can be really overwhelming. I know my kid has said, um, you know, asking somebody to like go get coffee or something, that always feels like asking someone on a date. So like finding like, oh, you want to go to this or you want to go for a walk, it always feels, and that feels awkward so let's like figure out low risk, right? Like if those kind of the idea of approaching someone else, those early friendship, let's pull it back and think with our kids about low risk activities. And again, all the way to something like family games, right? If you and your child, or you and your friend and have your child do some kind of like teamwork game, that builds friendship skills, that builds the kind of skills that your kid can use later. And again, it's a lot of those social emotional skills, but teamwork, collaboration, like kind of waiting your turn, the give and take, the casual communication that happens during those things. So it's cooperative, and games can be a really, again, thinking back to what we said before about the familiar setting. So think about a low risk activity in a familiar setting. This can start building some of those muscles. And again, we talked about this a little bit, but like groups or clubs or things like that might be happening in the community. Maybe your kid is more inclined towards art, even if your kid is not like passionate about art, something like that. Again, it's something that offers a focus for their eyes and their hands. That's not the eyes and the eyeballs of the other kid, right? It's like, it's really, you can sit together and do your thing in a workshop. So people are both working independently, but near each other. And that, is a little bit more low risk. Again, not for everybody, but the non-competitive sports, where if you're a team member, you are essential on that team, right? You're a team member. And, that idea of like the team relies on everybody being there. So you really matter. You really, really matter to the other members. And then spending time with animals, right? So this might be a volunteer, maybe your high schooler, is really wanting or needing to build some social skills. Animals can be a really great place to practice care, like, listening. Some of those, it can be a good low risk, again, practice. So maybe taking care of a neighbor's pet. It really does. It sounds very simple, but it's a way to practice relationship skills as well. So you see, these are all things that can be a little bit of a easier kind of slide in. I'm going to move through a couple, then I'm going to pause again. But so we talked about, these are all like little building blocks of ways we can support kids, whether they're younger or older, with the skills and the muscle building. But as we talked about in that original chart, sometimes the reason your kid may be really reticent to build friends is because they've been hurt, they've been harmed, they've had, they've had a negative experience with peers, and they're scared and protective for really good reasons and natural reasons, right? We can all, I think, relate to that. And so these are some of those painful conversations too around, we have bullying, which is on this side, which is, very serious. A bullying experience is really serious. And then there's, experiences of rejection and exclusion. And I think normalizing in some ways that in our lives, there's always going to be some degree of rejection one way or the other, right? So that is a part of the human experience. And being able to talk to your kids about it in different, like, kind of developmental ways, age appropriate ways around normalizing it, that everybody experiences it one way or another to different degrees in a lifetime, but that your kids' value is just inherent. Their value is just because they are them. They are who they are, and their value is not dependent on anyone else thinking so, or anyone else's evaluation. They just are. And so having those kinds of conversations, and what can help with this is, if you're angry at your child, or your kids made a big mistake or something like that, and remembering in those times, to remind kids, that you still love them, and you're really mad or really upset about this thing, you still love them. So for them to remember that their value is inherent, their value is just inherent. And then, I think sometimes, I don't know about others, but sometimes I'm really curious if my teammates can relate to this, but sometimes I have had different periods where I have wondered about a certain friend, like, like some friends that, I might love someone's like almost like a second kid. And then others like either make me nervous, and I believe next month's topic is exactly that, right? But and how do we navigate that? And so I think having the conversations with your kid to bring that, to make that intentional, right? So asking your kid, what kind of friends do you like? Like, what makes a good friend to you? What are the qualities of someone you would want in a good friend? And listening to that, really listening to what, because it may be similar to yours, it may be different, but it gets them thinking, oh, discernment, right? Of like what makes a good friend. Because sometimes if we've had kids that have been excluded time and time and time again, then for some kids, all they want is to be included by those folks who are, maybe the bullies or the excluded, but they want to be accepted. But, being able to pull back and be like, well, wait a minute, who do you think is a good friend? What are those qualities? And again, the role play is a great way to respond to teasing or exclusion. So not just that role play around, oh, how might you enter the playground or the party here? But so you hear that, what, I'll play you play the, like you play the, that kid who's bullying, or you play this, and I'll play you, and let's see how this goes. Um, and then, knowing when to step in versus letting them work it out. So again, if you're seeing that your child is getting bullied at school and it's repetitive and it's intentional, that's really important to bring that to the school, and to interrupt that, because then that becomes bullying, right? And, so it's that, again, that figuring out when to step in and when to support through being the emotional support, the container, the role player, the practice, the thought partner, to help them figure it out when it's something that's not as significant as bullying. But I'm curious for my teammates here, what stands out in this to you? And I'm also curious if any of you have had that experience where maybe your kid has had a friend and makes you nervous, or anything around that.
I'm not worried about that just yet, but on the other slide that you had, when you talked about having them attend like little group things, my sister, I had to leave my son with my sister because I had to go somewhere, and she's like, well, I'm taking my daughter to this it was like a community thing where they were making, I don't remember if it was pizza or cake. And I was like, I don't know if you'll like it, but hey, why not? And she said that he did really, really well, except for the fact that he was fighting her because he wanted to use the knife. And she was like, no. But the fact that I guess he was so into it. I mean, there's other kids there, but he was just, like you said, he was just so focused on it and doing that and knowing that his cousin was there with him, kind of helping him out,
Yeah.
and I would like, I mean, it goes back to Julie, like, that's not what I expected him to do. I expect him to do things that I enjoy.
Right,
Never
right.
thought that he would
Yeah,
like little things like that. So,
yeah.
um,
Might be a future pizza maker.
or cook. I gotta get
Cook,
him to
yep.
start cooking. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great. Um, so, you know, we talked about some of these things that are like the different kinds of challenges and different ways we can support our kid when they're struggling for different reasons with making a friend. But sometimes, again, back to that discernment thing, sometimes you want to keep an eye out for when it's kind of crosses a line where it could be important to get more help. And where to get more help is totally up to you, right? You might be someone who um, is like me, who I have absolutely, appreciated therapy in my life, in my family's life. I think that's a great, great place to go. If that's one place that you can go for extra help. It could be your school. Maybe you can talk to a school counselor at your school. It might be a faith leader in your community that you can talk to. But figuring out where to go for some extra help in certain situations. So if you feel like your child is struggling with loneliness in a really ongoing way that seems to be like deepening and not really getting better, and there's a persistent sadness and you're seeing signs of depression, that would be a really important time to get extra help. Another place to get extra help is just your medical doctor. You can talk to your medical doctor as well, and they can help with referrals with things like that. As I mentioned before, that extreme anxiety around social situations, and we talked about that when Victor was giving that example of those two kids, to those two students, that sometimes anxiety can get worse and can deepen. And so if it feels like the anxiety around the social situations is progressing to a way, to a point where your child maybe doesn't want to be anywhere, or it's too overwhelming to think of going to a group thing, and that maybe that becomes, oh, it's too overwhelming to go to school, or feeling like your child just wants to be home. That's if you are experiencing that, you are not alone. So very many bryt families experience that. You're not alone, and there's ways that we work with schools and with each other on that experience. So that's really want you to know you're not alone if you're experiencing that. Yeah, just the continued struggles. Maybe you do find a therapist or you do talk to a school counselor and you're trying different things, but it's not seeming to change things or not seeming to get better. That can be another time to ask for help. And again, bullying. If you see signs of that repeated intimidation, that's intentional, repeated, targeted, then that's really important to talk to the school, if or wherever it's happening. Okay, so um, I hope you're getting the sense of how important and how impactful a parent can be in this journey, right? So with all these little things we're talking about, you really are important. You really, really can be helpful as a parent here. And some of these things is how you make meaning of it and how you talk to your child about some of this. So, again, your child might be hungry for a friend. It's what they want more than anything is a friend or a group of friends. And remembering, think about yourself. Think about how you've made friends over time, either as a kid or as an adult. Friendships take time, right? Like think about the last friend maybe you made. It wasn't overnight. It's not, it takes time. And so I think the time part is an important and helpful reminder for your kid. And the effort part, that's the social skills part, right? Like that's the muscle building there, the practice that we talk about. Um, and then, a child, your kid might have worked really hard and practiced and just like put a lot of intention into, agreeing to have a birthday party and trying to, invite kids in the class, and maybe not many came, or maybe only one came or two, so maybe there's your child will feel like a huge social failure, or huge, or like the impact can feel so big, and being able to sit again as that container with your kid, and again, to validate and acknowledge, but reframe some of these things as a way to better understand themselves. And again, it's depending on the age of your child, but like, oh, it sounds like for you, maybe you know you're someone who maybe doesn't like the small parties or the big party, that it's not the main point in that experience, but you know what I mean? Like, kind of having a conversation, because a lot of times kids, might be really, really, really hard on themselves, especially if they live with anxiety, and really critical of themselves. So being able to, kind of reframe some of that, and acknowledge the small social successes. If your child, again, is someone who has never ever invited a kid to play, or teenager to hang out, and after all your support, and you're practicing, they do. And so, acknowledging it. I know for some kids they might, be embarrassed if it's like overblown, right? But acknowledging, hey, you know you just made a coffee date with that friend, and 6 months ago you never would, just like pointing it out, and showing them that road. And then again, I always like this analogy with, um, maybe your kid's trying with different friends and it's not quite clicking. Maybe it's not that your kid isn't able to make a friend, but the friends, they're just like not really, that we have to try on a lot of shoes, right, to find the right pair, a lot of jackets to find the perfect jacket. No such thing as perfect, but you know what I mean. And so just normalizing that with our kids, to, this is the human experience. We all, we're all trying. And yep, so I'm almost done here. Whoops. So just to, and then I'll leave it for my teammates for any last thoughts too. But just again, everybody's social journey is different. You matter. You really can be really helpful and supportive as a parent. Um, you're not alone. If you're struggling with the pain of parenting a child who's in pain around this, come to our parent conversations. Friendship skills can be learned if your kid, they can be learned and practiced. And know when to seek extra support. So with that, I'm going to just stop my share here and pass it over. What kind of final thoughts or other thoughts are on your minds? I just looked at the clock and look at this.
No, amazing. You're amazing, Megan. You did so well. It was great.
Thanks.
Awesome. I was, what kept coming up for me is my child's 14, and so she really was always attracted to, even in preschool, to the girl, the female in the classroom, who was sort of almost the bully, like, because she saw her as powerful. So she really wanted to befriend her all the time, and she would be rejected constantly. And it wasn't until she got to be a 7 or 8 she found these girls that were not mean, and not the mean girls in the room. And I saw that shift happen, and it was like this really interesting. And I go, so you're not interested in them anymore? Like this other
Yeah.
girl and her friends? She goes, no, I found these girls and they're nice and they're great. But she had to keep trying over and over again. As a parent, that was excruciating to
Yes.
watch. But she figured it out, and it's still working today. You can see she's still sort of attracted by the mean girl, but she's like, nah, I don't want to do that.
That's such a good point around, which I feel like could be a whole other learning session around what that is, right? Like feeling like where's the power in the room, and like the draw, because I think that's a human thing too that our kids can, yeah. 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 All right. Well, thanks you guys. So Julie, do you want to like wrap us up with the parent conversations and anything else
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I just want to remind you that the first Tuesday of every month during the school year, we have a parent learning event like we had tonight. Our last one for this school year will be Tuesday, May 6th. And the topic, as Megan pointed out, is parenting when you're not comfortable with your child's peer group. We encourage you to join us. That will be 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Of course, you can always watch it on YouTube later. We have a website where you can go and look at the previous parent learning events that we've done. It's brightfamilyengagement.org. So feel free to go check that out. You can find a lot of information there. And you will also find where we have our caregiver conversations. And those are the second Tuesday of every month for elementary aged parents. And then again, those are at 7 p.m. Pacific and Eastern Standard Time. You will have two different links for that on the website. And then on the third Tuesday of the month, we have a middle high parent conversations where we again talk about the topic of the month, but we'll talk about anything. And again, if you come and you're a different age group, we'll still be glad to see you. So please come and talk with us. And then finally, our last group of the month is the fourth Tuesday of the month, again, 7 p.m. And that is our BIPOC affinity group. I hope you all have a great evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. Take care.